Good evening. Welcome to our Old Testament studies. Thanks for joining us here at Cleveland Community Chapel. As we work our way through Genesis a chapter at a time, we've made it to chapter 45. There's 50 chapters, so we're going to wind this thing down before long. Then I think we're going to go over to Proverbs and study for a while. But let's get into Genesis 45. There's been a slow, dramatic build-up with Joseph and his brothers. They travel back and forth. There's famine in the land, so they heard there's food in Egypt. They come down. All they know is that 27 years ago or so, they sold their brother into slavery, and they think he's dead and gone, or all this. They have no idea. They've been dealing with their brother so long ago. And finally, in tonight's chapter, it's the big reveal. Joseph's going to reveal himself to his brothers who he really is. So, chapter 45, verse 1. Then Joseph, he's got his brothers back before him once again. Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. It reminds me of going over to the New Testament and reading John chapter 11, when the shortest verse in the Bible, I believe it's John 11:32, and Jesus wept, that two-word verse. Remember that took place, about to get struck by lightning here, that took place when Jesus was at the tomb of Lazarus. He was dead and other people was there, and Jesus identifies with these other people, and he is in his humanity. He cries with everybody else, weeping with those that weep around him. But he's about to reveal himself, who he is too, when he says, "Lazarus, come forth." And he reveals who he really is to the people there. If they'll receive it, only God could do that. So there's all these ties between Joseph of Genesis and Jesus of the New Testament. Joseph was a type of Christ to reveal him to us. So here we go, back to the Old Testament here. They don't know who he is yet. He's just there crying before him. They're looking, well, why is this guy crying, I guess? And he sends everybody out but his brothers. Verse 2. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Does my father yet live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. We'd put it this way. They were in shock. They were totally in shock. And Joseph said to his brethren, "Come near to me, I pray you." And they came near, and he said, "I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now, therefore, be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life." Boy, there's a sermon in that verse. Joseph's got it all figured out. Remember, he got sold into slavery. He goes through prison, and he's doing good down in Potiphar's household. He gets falsely charged, ends up in prison for years, gets back out, and he's spiritually mature enough to realize that, hey, God's in these details. Sometimes we say the devil's in the details. There's truth to it, but God's in the details too. And he realized that everything he's going through, he may not understand it at the time himself, but he trusted that God has a plan and God has a purpose. And that's what he's relaying to his brothers. Now, you sold me, but don't be mad at yourself. Said it was the providence of God. And God had a purpose in that too. God had a purpose in his providence. I went through all this stuff because what if it hadn't happened? The whole family would have perished up there and starved to death. And not only his family, but Egypt, because Joseph's the one that God worked through to interpret the dream and say, you got to store this food up because there's 7 years of famine coming and all this. So, see, verse 6, he says, "For these 2 years has famine been in the land." We went through 7 years of plenty, we stored up, now we had 2 years of famine. "And yet there are 5 years still to come, in which there will be neither earing nor harvest." Drought, whatever's going on, it's just bad agricultural time. "And God sent me before you." See, he said, God sent me before you. It wasn't just you selling me. God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity of the earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. Once again, I'll say, what if that hadn't happened back when he was a kid? What if he hadn't ended up here in Egypt? You know, you look back over your own life and look at things like that and say, what if this hadn't happened? What if that hadn't happened? And they say that, hey, not everything was good, but God could be working in a providential way because he has a purpose for you and those that you may come in contact with. Or the way Paul put it in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28, he said that all things are working together for good to those who love God, those who are the called according to his purpose. Not everything's good, but everything can work together to bring good and to bring God's purpose out. Verse 8, so now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he's made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler through all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, hurry, go up to my father, and say unto him, thus saith your son Joseph, God's made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, tarry not, thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. Now, Joseph says, it's a good patch of land down there. I know that y'all are shepherds and all, so just bring your herds down here. And said, there's good green grass along the Goshen, down there along the Nile. And said, you can live down there. And that's where they come down and settle eventually. And guess what? It was hundreds of years that they lived there, but things changed over the centuries. And you get to the book of Exodus, and they're wanting out of there. See, these are the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, all these that have settled down there. By the time Moses comes along, they've been made slaves. And now they're praying to God to get them back to the promised land. But here, it's a good thing they're moving here right now, though. You'll dwell in the land of Goshen. You'll be near to me, thou and thy children and the children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all you has. And there will I nourish thee. Joseph says, for there are 5 years left of this famine, lest thou and thy household and all you have come to poverty. If you stay up there, you can't make it. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it's my mouth that speaks unto you. And you'll tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and all that you've seen, and you shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren, and he wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with them. I highlighted mine. After that, his brethren, this is the first time they've opened their mouth. They've been sitting there with their mouth open, dumbfounded, when the big reveals happen that this is their brother they've been dealing with. Verse 16, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh says, what's all that noise going on down there in the house? And somebody said, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brethren, this do you. Here's what I want you to do. Lade your beast and go, get you into the land of Canaan, take your father and your household, come to me. And I'll give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do you. He said, take you some wagons, and I've read that the Egyptians had the wheel, but they didn't have that up in Canaan yet, so they've got a new tool. Take some of these wagons and load them down and bring you, move with them out of the land of Egypt, and for your little ones, for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also, he said, regard not your stuff. Don't worry about your stuff. We'll take care of you. For the good of the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons, according to the commandment of Pharaoh. And he gave them provisions for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of clothes, raiment. But to Benjamin, his full brother that he really loved, more than the rest of them, but to Benjamin, he might have been testing the other ones too. Once again, he gave him more, like he did the portions of food. He gave him 300 pieces of silver, 5 changes of raiment. And to his father, he sent after this manner, 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father, by the way, for the journey. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out of the way. That means, don't y'all get lost now. Go ahead and hurry. And they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph's yet alive. And he's governor over all the land of Egypt. Now his father thought his son had died almost 3 decades ago. Remember, they brought the old bloody coat of many colors to him. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed him not. No, what are you saying? He believed him not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which had said unto them. And they still wouldn't believe him, so they said, come out here and look, Daddy. And it says, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Jacob was one of these at this point that you'd say, seeing was believing for him. He's seen all that stuff that come back, and he thought, well, they're telling the truth. And Israel said, it's enough. Another word for, remember that's the other name for Jacob, Jacob and Israel. He said, it's enough. Joseph, my son's yet alive, and I'm going to go down and see him before I die. He was very old, remember. He said, this lastly, I'll go down and see my boy again for he's alive. It's kind of like the old prodigal son's father at this point. This, my son, was dead, and he's alive again. And he's going to go down and celebrate with him. See you next week. Chapter 46 coming up.